Next one on the list of people who disappoint us. New Assassin's Creed is now going to be a service-based game. So this is coming from Jason Schreier at Bloomberg, and it's a long article. I suggest you go read it, but I'm going to try and make it as concise as I can. So he writes, Assassin's Creed, a video game franchise set in a huge world where each one can take hundreds of hours to complete, is getting even bigger. A new project, which is known inside Ubisoft Entertainment SA by the codename Assassin's Creed Infinity, sets out to create a massive online platform that evolves over time, according to people familiar with its development. Whereas previous Assassin's Creed games each unfolded in specific historical settings, such as ancient Greece, or I'm going to butcher this, Ptolemaic Egypt, basically Egypt, Infinity will contain multiple settings with room to expand to others in the months and years following its debut, said the people who asked not to be identified, discussing a project under development. Individual games on the platform might look and feel different, but they will all be connected. ... He continues, a spokeswoman for Ubisoft declined to discuss Infinity in detail, but acknowledged its existence. Ubisoft aims to exceed the expectations of fans who have been asking for a more cohesive approach to the series, the spokeswoman said. Inspired by smash hits like Fortnite and Grand Theft Auto 5, these living online platforms can keep players engaged for years by frequently adding new content or changing the experience in dramatic ways. The fifth Grand Theft Auto game, which has sold more than 140 million copies, largely thanks to its constantly updated multiplayer mode, is approaching its 8th birthday with versions planned for third generation of game consoles. My apologies. Service games generate huge revenue over time by hooking players and pushing them to spend money on special content within the game. GTA 5 helped drive shares of its publisher, Take-Two Interactive Software Incorporated, up 42% since the beginning of last year. In the same period, Ubisoft shares were flat. After news of Assassin's Creed Infinity, the stock jumped again to Wednesday in a trading, intraday training. I don't know. I'm not an accountant or financial guy. So, Adam, what do you make of Assassin's Creed being a service game? What do you think that's going to look like, first of all?
An unfinished game?
Yeah.
if I'm being serious, that's what I think it'll be, because that's what every service game has been. But I mean, if we're talking, what it's going to look like, it's going to look like a game that's going to have a bunch of stuff in it at the very beginning that'll end pretty quickly, have nothing to go on, whether that's a couple of time periods, whatever that may be with what it looks like. And then over time, they'll come up with other ideas, whether they're good or bad, and they'll throw them in collectively. And that sounds all and good on paper sometimes. I mean, look, it sounds pretty cool that you can play a game that you can go to multiple time periods. They may even add more time periods down the road. That sure might be swell. But what are you going to do if the story sucks? Because that's a possibility. What are you going to do if the gameplay runs stale within the first 20 hours? What are you going to do when the quality of the game is lessened because they don't care, because they know they can add it in later? I don't get why people are even remotely interested in the idea of games as a live service anymore. Because every example that we've seen has proven that for the most part, it's not worthwhile.
Yeah, for every one hit you have 3 or 4 anthems.
Everybody looks at Destiny and thinks that it works really well. It's like, guys, keep in mind that Destiny is a game that unless you're really into it, you play it, have nothing to do, so you leave it for 4 months and come back and have to pay money to come back. Why?
Yeah, how I see them kind of implementing this, if it was me, or like the way that makes sense, is I think what they're hopefully doing is they're going to wrap up that mess of a modern day story, which is absolutely the worst part of the game. If you like that part, you're wrong. It's fine. But what they're going to do is they're going to say, like, okay, we're going to wrap up this, main story, do it over, a couple seasons or whatever. And it'll just be you're an animus hopping from, time period to time period, chasing whatever. But I don't know, like for me, like as an Assassin's Creed fan, like I've played every single one of them. I mean, except Assassin's Creed Rogue, just because it just never worked out. But like I've played them all. I love them. I'm a history nerd. I'm a stealth nerd, and I know it's not stealth anymore, so whatever. But like I've been getting more and more disappointed, and I think that this might be the nail in the coffin. Like I don't want to pay, constantly to play Assassin's Creed games. Like I like having a standalone game that is small, or not small, but is truncated. It is a start and finish, and then you're done, move along kind of game. I do not need it to be a live service. It's something I look forward to. I play it at the end of the year. I play it for a couple months. I'm done. I'm never going back to it. And to be fair, that worked well. Like, I feel like the thing I didn't like about Valhalla is Valhalla just dragged on too long, and Assassin's Creed is very much starting to seem like a soap opera, especially with that modern day stuff. And so I don't know. I don't see it working. I think it's going to be. I don't think it's going to go well.
So here's a hot take. And this is a large reason of why we're getting games like Valhalla, and we're getting, obviously, this thing with Infinite, potentially. Mm-hmm. We need to stop valuing hours of time as a measure of what's worth our money. I'm not saying we don't get rid of it entirely, but I think we need to stop looking at 100 hours in a video game, meaning that it's worth your money. Mm-hmm. I'm going to review Miles Morales very shortly on this podcast, and that game took me less than 10 hours, and I loved every moment of it. I could have played another 10 hours, could have played another 20 hours of it, honestly. But 100 hours? I don't know if I love a lot of things 100 hours. I can play a JRPG, because most of what a JRPG is grinding. It's a lot of storytelling, because it's all text usually. Sometimes you'll get some voice acting ones, but more often than not, it's a lot of text. And there's a lot of things to do, a lot of side quests. What is Valhalla? What is Assassin's Creed right now? And I've played Odyssey. I haven't played Valhalla yet. I'm getting to that at some point, hopefully. But I've played Odyssey. You know what Odyssey is? It's a story that isn't very good, that has the same 5 side quests repeated 100 times, with a giant map that has nothing to do in it. You know what a JRPG does? It has a lot of shit to do in a world that isn't overwhelming to you, and has a story that most of the time is really worthwhile, and in the same amount of hours. So what's the problem here? It's the fact that the kind of game that this, with Assassin's Creed, is trying to make does not fit 100 hours. You can make it fit 100 hours, but it's not going to be a good 100 hours. I know a lot of people say they love those kind of games, and believe me, I do too, because I do like time wasters, because it is nice to have something that I can just throw a podcast on when I need to catch up on something, and just go like do random stuff for 2 hours and not have to think. It's nice. But after playing like one of those, I don't really want to go back to another one in a couple of months, and then a couple of years down the road, the same game comes out again from the same series, and I'm just playing it with a different coat of paint.
Yeah. I think the problem is that the examples that we've given so far, like we have Grand Theft Auto, we have Fortnite, we have Destiny, like those are the big ones. Those aren't story-driven games. Those aren't games that anyone is playing for the story. You know, Grand Theft Auto might be the closest, but most of the people playing Grand Theft Auto are not playing it for the long-term narrative of GTA Online. They're playing it to do dumb shit and like fly planes through like on like Hot Wheels racetracks in the sky. Like that's what they're doing. Yeah,
I mean, like you can make the argument that Destiny has story, but it's mostly for like lore hunters. So there's that.
Yeah. But the story is not what is the driving force of that game. No. It's the gameplay, it's the loops, it's the loot, it's the
raids are what sells those games right now.
Yeah. And so when you take a game like Assassin's Creed, which I don't think anyone is clamoring like, oh man, Assassin's Creed is the best like gameplay game in the sense of, you know, everyone's dying to play the mechanics. It's a pretty standard game, but it's a combination of having a story and good mechanics. And I find that, you know, if you're going to do a live service, it's going to become a situation where it's just, you know, here's the episode of the week or the month or whatever, play it. And then like nothing's going to get resolved because you can't resolve anything because that's not how a live service works.
We need to get rid of the giant maps too.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Like, look, it used to be such like a badge of honor to show how big your map was. It's like, guys, I think we've understood now that a map can only be so big before it's lifeless. Mm-hmm. Like, believe me, I loved God of War, like the new God of War, but there's so much dead space in the water of that map. It's like, man, you could have streamlined this just a little bit more. And that's not even a big map in comparison to other games. Like Odyssey, holy crap, there is way too much nothingness there. Mm-hmm. Like Assassin's Creed is a big example of that. Because
wait for Valhalla. Wait for Valhalla, my friend.
That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah. You see, I think God of War did it right though, in that God of War, for the most part, like it had a larger hub world, but it's not huge.
It's not huge. It's still slightly a little too big, but at least there's the smaller levels to make it feel like it isn't.
Yeah, but I find the thing is it also doesn't I find it doesn't waste your time in the sense of go to point A on, the northeast corner, you get there and they're like, "Oh, too bad. We need you to go down to the
That is
southwest
true.
corner."
They don't do that shit.
Like it's pretty direct. Like unless you're going around and you're exploring and you're doing like your own wandering, it has a pretty tight, narrow, corridor for you to follow through. And I find that the other thing is that they fill it. Like you've got Mimir going off giving his like stories and stuff that at least like I enjoyed that time because it was interesting to travel. Something like Valhalla, I'm just sitting there and I'm just, riding my horse and there's like some, background music playing, which is just, it's boring.
Yeah, God of War is definitely like the closest you can get to treading that line, but it does a good enough job at least trying to keep you invested. Whereas games like Assassin's Creed, and I don't know. Actually, let's turn it around a little bit because you finished that not too long ago either. How does Cyberpunk deal with that stuff?
Cyberpunk, I found was better about it. Like I found that like the city, like it, like the fast traveling was good, like, but it like you move quickly through the town and you move quickly through the map. I didn't find it overly large, but I also found that it was like it was done well in a way that I found like it was somewhat contained. So like I was playing one part of the map, and then once I did all that, then it opens up a little bit more, and I don't have a reason to go out to the far ends and then come back. For the most part, I mean, as you get later on in the game, you might connect with people and have to go a little bit further, but like, yeah, it was not as much of a chore as it was for something like Valhalla.
Do you remember how it used to be with like GTA 3 and Vice City and stuff like that in San Andreas? How you would start in one section and then a mission would unlock the next section. And then a couple hours later, another mission would unlock this section. And by the end of the game, you have the entire map to play in.
Yeah.
The problem with Assassin's Creed games is that for the most part, they just give you a map and be like, do whatever you want.
Yeah. No, that is like a problem with it in that like that they let you loose, and then because you're let loose, they throw stuff across the map and there's no, I mean, I'm sure there is. I'm not trying to like crap on them. Like there is thought put into it, but there's a lot of time spent going back and forth. The one thing that Valhalla did do well is that for the most part, you would go to an area and you would do missions within that area, but it was way too big that it was just took forever to get anywhere. And it was like, this isn't fun.
It's also too like, well, there are some games where that kind of travel can at least be interesting. Like I'm sure Cyberpunk, because there's cars and stuff, there are ways to make that journey a little bit more interesting. I feel like it's really hard to do when you're on a horse, on a boat, or walking.
Here's the thing. If your game has an option that you can like fast traveling, I totally understand. And I think that there should be fast traveling. And I get that you have to go from point A to point B walking. That's fine too. But if your game has a system where you could just set, autopilot so your character can ride to a point, your map is too big. You are taking away, you are admitting that this is not a fun activity and that people may not want to do it. And if you're doing that, then you have not designed a good map.
Now, because we went off topic, to go back to the live service thing, again, we don't have very many examples of games that work under that service. And it's in the same vein of like, I think people look at, GTA Online and Destiny and Fortnite and look at it the same way that a lot of people used to look at World of Warcraft and being like, we got to do that. Because look at how much money that makes us. Same with Overwatch. Everybody looked at Overwatch for a while and said, we got to do that. That's where the money is. And then you realize that just because you do the exact same thing they do doesn't mean it will work. And I think with Assassin's Creed, this is a really stupid idea because it seems like they're trying to make the games even bigger when the reality is they need to find a way to streamline this down to 60 hours.
They need to make it smaller. Yeah. Like if you think of like the golden ones, like the ones that people love, it's, Assassin's Creed Black Flag, it's Assassin's Creed 2. And like for all the crap that,
and they're still big.
Gets, they are. But one of the things like Cyberpunk gets a lot of crap, but the one thing that CD Projekt Red did really well, and I kind of wish that more games did, is have a smaller truncated story. And Cyberpunk could have even been a little bit longer because it is a breezy game. But the fact that they said, hey, our main quest, like the main story here, you can breeze through it 20 hours or so, great. But there is so much more. Like if you want just a quick game, you want to get in, get the story, get out, it's not going to take you long. You can do it. But if you want to go deeper, if you want to, do more side quests and flesh out those side characters and build character relationships and have that impact the game, that's awesome. Like I feel like having a game where there's off ramps. So like you want to, just get the main story, get in, get out, you're done. here you go. There's that option. If you want a main story with a little bit more fleshed out characters, here's the main game along with some side quests that you can complete beforehand. And then hey, you want to live in this world? Here is a bunch of stuff that you can do. And I think having those ramps that players can kind of decide like, hey, I'm done. Like I'm finished with this game. I think that works. And this brings up the thing, like, this is why people don't finish games. Like, they're too long and there's no, like, it's either I'm going to play this right to the end or I'm going to quit halfway through, and it's hard for people to get invested.
Not to mention that there are people that really like trophy and achievement hunting, and when you're playing a game like Assassin's Creed and realizing how much redundant shit you have to do. Because, like, look, I'm sure, you know, Cyberpunk does it pretty well, where most of the stuff that you do on the side is really engaging, or is at least, like, interesting. Assassin's Creed, it's the same thing 50 times. It's the same, go find a base, kill everybody in it, and light the tower on fire or some shit. 50 times.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I remember with Assassin's Creed Odyssey, like, you had 50 targets to kill to get, like, the true ending or whatever.
And it was the same format. Sneak up on a place, kill a few people in between, Spartan kick off from a roof.
Pretty much, yeah. So, I don't know. Like, I love the Assassin's Creed franchise. Like, it's something, like, it was one of the first games that I played on the PS3. And I've loved it. I've got a couple of the collector's editions. Like, I love it. But it is a franchise that is, personally, like, getting harder and harder to get excited for. And I'd like to just see it go back to its roots. Get rid of this modern story crap. Just, you know, tell an endless war between Templars and Assassins, and just tell a little micro story throughout. You know, talk of times where, you know, the Assassins were on top and they had to defend against the Templars, or vice versa, or something like that. Like, just make these smaller little stories.
At the very least, if you want to do a modern story so badly, don't have a modern story where it's fighting. Just have, like, this cool story of, like, this you know, archaeologist or whatever that's trying to find interesting things about the world, and through the animus is able to, like, learn things that we never did before. Like, you can have it as simple, like, if you want to have some interjection of modern, like, stuff, do that. Stop trying to make this, like, extra story along with it of, like, you know, the Templar. Like, if you want to do something like that maybe down the road, just make a modern game with it. Like, just do that. Just do a short, like, 10-hour game and having fun with that.
Well, it's interesting because I wonder, like, I played Odyssey, but I never played, like, the Atlantis stuff. And then I went into Valhalla, and apparently you had to be, like, invested and have played all of the Atlantis stuff. And I wonder if that's what it's just going to look like, is just, you know, it's just going to be smaller DLC throughout the whole time. And I don't know.
And what's it going to cost, which is the even bigger part. It's like, are you going to want to waste the money on, let's be honest, copy and pasted content?
Yeah.